Hello and welcome YouTube. This is TSR Dion and Emperor of the 409th. And today I've got a very special battle here for you. Today we've got 409th versus Fate Clan. Now, some background history here before we get into this. So this battle is going to be very interesting because, well, Crucible and Teodor, they used to be part of a clan called Unity, which is kind of no longer a thing, but this is where they come from, more or less. And Unity is a historical rival of the 409th, and when 409th and Unity would have battles against each other, they tended to go a certain way. So Unity had a certain style where they would concentrate their forces and create like kind of a defensive fortress, and it wouldn't be a purely defensive thing. They would also counterattack you, and they would be very deadly effective in doing so, and that was kind of a thing that Unity could do very well. Meanwhile, 409th naturally would go these more cavalry aggressive factions like France and Ottomans, and we would go much more into a cavalry assault flanking sort of rush attack to envelop them. And so I just found it interesting how Crucible and Teodor versus Kharhiv and Sexyman, they're essentially going to do a mirror of like how these battles between 409th and Unity would always go. So yeah. Now, here on this side, you have Crucible using Prussia. He's got a concentration of light infantry there in the middle there, along with Teodor, who also has a concentration of light infantry in the middle with Great Britain. What they're going to do is they're going to move up with this very strong light infantry focused center into this middle forest, and they're going to use that as the foundation for this fortress that they're going to create. They're going to create a defensive fortress, like I said, and they are going to rely on that in order to absorb and push the center. But they're also going to, their flank is not going to be vulnerable, as you're going to see this play out. They're going to be in a position where they're going to kind of absorb the initial blow from the concentration of forces on the 409th side against their flank, and they're going to counterattack, and then that's going to be a very difficult thing to deal with when you see it happen. But let's get right into this battle. So Kharkiv is France and Sexyman is Ottomans, and they're going to have to essentially, like, these are long-time 409th veteran players themselves, so they understand more or less how you would play against these guys. They might have played against them historically in the past too. So they're going to go at them with the classic 409th style of the flank rush with their cavalry focused nations. And so here we go. We're gonna make first contact here shortly with Teodor and Crucible. Gonna start delivering some withering firepower here in the center forest. You're gonna see when one shoots, the other's gonna move forward, and they're gonna constantly do this type of deal, and it's gonna be a very difficult kind of thing to deal with because very strong attacks like this with good light infantry, like Prussia and Great Britain have the best light infantry in the game. It would be very difficult to fight against this, especially with nations like France and Ottomans that don't have light infantry good enough to counter them directly. That is a devastating amount of firepower coming at them in the middle forest, but nonetheless, Kharkiv and Sexyman are not going to just leave it uncontested. They are going to actually try to fight it head on nonetheless. You see Teodor here has Fencibles mixed in with Coldstream Darts here. I don't know why he did that, but that's what he went with. That's an interesting little thing he's got going there. So now here's Kharkiv, now starting to move in and start to develop the flank on his side. He's going to use his light infantry to hold his Teodor's flanking units in place there. And then once he's got himself established, you see Sexyman's doing the same thing. He's using his light infantry from the flank to deliver flanking fires into the forest at an angle, which is going to be a pretty nice little support there in preparation for their frontal assault. This light infantry is in a good position here. Yeah, so here we go. Kharkiv is moving straight in there with his French cavalry while he's continuing to establish this flanking fire here against Teodor. So what the 409 team has done, they set up this nice little enveloping holding pattern here, and now they're going in against the center to try to deal with this devastating strong front that Teodor and Crucible put up here. And Kharhiv got in there pretty good with his cavalry. As you see, he managed to catch that Coldstream Guard because that Fencible was there. He charged the Fencible. That allowed him to get into the Coldstream Guard, even though it went into square. He did a good amount of damage to that Coldstream Guard. Like, Teodor lost a lot of units to that Coldstream Guard. There you see, that's not going to be a good thing. And yeah, Kharhiv has a very good initiative into pushing the center force. Now, it is very, very good how they managed to kind of press the flanks and then go in here in the middle here against where the maturity of their units are at. Like the maturity of their good stuff, like their light infantries. Their light infantries are their main kind of damage dealing unit here. It's very hard to get in at them, but they managed to get in at them nonetheless. Teodor took a lot of damage from that push from Kharhiv. That forced Crucible to have to pull back and get back online with Teodor here. And Teodor has reformed his lines, and now he's shooting off that cavalry, but Kharhiv managed to get a rally off on his cavalry to keep it in the fight just a little bit longer. But Kharkiv's cavalry is literally down to like 1, 2, and 3 men. So they're essentially kind of blunted, but you know, nonetheless, Kharhiv and Sexyman wasted no time after that cavalry assault, because now they've got their line infantry up close enough to start trading fires with those light infantries. So Kharhiv and Sexyman has successfully managed to push and deliver a good amount of fire. Bam! That's a point-blank range shot from the Nizam mounted gun cavalries. Yeah, the 419 has successfully started to push Teodor and Crucible out of the center force here. This is very, very, very good. This is a very hard thing to do. You see Crucible going for the counterattack there with his cavalry. But the strategic situation is that 4/9 is heavily winning here. Kharhiv is now that they've done a good job in the middle, they're committing to a flank charge here. So Kharhiv, he managed to get in pretty good against those lines, and he's moving up his own line infantries there. Now here's where things are going to start to go a little bit south for 4/9, because remember I told you, like, this is how these Unity guys play. See Kharhiv trying to break that square there. So here's what they're going to respond with. Like, yeah, they did take an L in the middle there on their initial push, but don't be fooled. Crucible and Teodor are far from done here. So you see, now they're beginning their counterattack here on this flank. He went there, faked attack against his cavalry, then he immediately rushes onto his line. Now, Kharhiv did manage to hit square with that line, but okay, he is now going to just continue going down the line, and that's going to complicate things for Kharhiv there. Teodor also has a significant amount of reserve lines ready to assist and push and shoot off some of Kharkiv's cavalry. So that's going to be kind of a complicating situation for Kharhiv going forward from there. Now, Sexyman has not committed to his own flank push yet, but nonetheless, because of that, that's going to allow Crucible to come in here with his cavalry and assist Teodor and really putting the kibosh on Kharhiv over here. So you'll see his units start to come in here in a second here. And yeah, Teodor's reserve lines are now in this too, and this is basically riposte Kharkiv's initial flank push. Kharhiv is going to have to run away now because he's far outnumbered by those British lines. Teodor is going to start to wrap up that flank and start to stabilize that front there. But now Sexyman is committing to his own flank push now. He committed to it as soon as he saw Crucible heading over to Teodor with his units. Sexyman's getting point-blank range shots with his light infantry there in the forest still. The forest battle is in 4/9's favor, but here we go. Crucible's now taking his units back and counter-attacking against Sexyman. So that's going to complicate Sexyman's efforts. Now, Sexyman is going to do a better job at responding to that counterattack. You see him moving his Nizams over to try and shoot that cavalry off of his lines. He also managed to get square formation on the flank rushes, but he did miss a square there in the middle. That's not a problem. He's going to use his gun cavalries to shoot off that what are those hussars, Prussian hussars. Or actually, no, he's not going to shoot. He's just going to go into melee with his Nizams. Yeah, Crucible did a pretty nice little countercharge there, but it wasn't enough to stop Sexyman's overall push, though, because Sexyman is still pushing more or less with healthy lines. So this counterattack that Crucible did is not going to be as devastating as Teodor's counterattack was against Kharkiv. Kharkiv's flank has been more or less collapsed. Teodor has plenty of healthy lines, and he's stabilizing and wrapping up this flank over here. So, like I said, guys, just because the 419 was able to push a very effective counter to their initial center position there that they had, like they had a very strong center position. 419 countered that more or less, but just because they managed to do that did not mean at all that they were out of the fight. They did a count. They were planning on a counterattack on the flanks there, and they carried it out. Crucibles did not go as well as Teodor's did. Teodor basically collapsed Kharkiv's entire flank there, and so they've more or less gotten this back into an even fight here. Where they were losing, now it's stabilized, and now the battle's even again. So this battle can still go either way. This battle is still very much in the balance here. But you see, so Crucible is falling back from his flank. Teodor is pushing his flank. But you see they're staying very much on line with each other and supporting each other as needed. It's really the 409th side here that is less able to support each other because they're the ones on the outside here, so they don't have reinforcing supporting lines as much as the Fate team does. And Sexyman is more or less going to have to bring this home himself because Kharkiv has been pretty effectively countered over there. Pretty much, and he's not able to support him quickly. See, Crucible's double lining with musketeers and foot guard. Oh, actually, those are grenadiers. Whoa, he's got the grenadiers out there. That's not something you commonly see, but he's gonna melee charge with those grenadiers. Holy hell! That is a devastating charge with those grenadiers. Like, if you were ever gonna use grenadiers, this is how you would basically use them. People don't typically use grenadiers, but if you can do something like this where you're able to catch someone with a healthy grenadier unit in melee like Crucible just did, that is a pretty good way to use grenadiers, I guess. People don't tend to use them. Sexyman immediately countered and got onto that grenadier with his Nizam cavalry there. That's going to be a pretty good move to shake off that grenadier unit and get his line infantry out of there. As you see, Kharkiv is almost entirely out of the game, aside from like a couple line infantries and his general. Teodor is still relatively healthy compared to Kharkiv. Crucible is almost out of the match, and you see that it's really just Sexyman who has a significant army left, but it's still almost 2 versus 1 here. So again, like, and you see the balance of power too. The balance of power is favoring the Fate team. So it's still very much in the balance here, guys. Yeah, Sexyman is gonna have to more or less bring this in and finish this off here himself if they are to win. You see Teodor's British lines, though, they are having a bit of a morale situation. They're having low morale. And now Sexyman is rushing in with the Civic Janissaries. He saved them for the perfect moment here. That is a perfect charge there. The Civic Janissaries. Teodor's going to have a difficult time shaking that off at all. Teodor rallied his men there. He kind of did it a little bit too late though, because his unit there had already routed. So good job there for Sexyman routing that unit with his Siberian Janissaries. That's going to shift the balance of power back in 4-9's favor. Yep. And now it's looking like a clear 4-9 victory for the most part, because Sexyman outnumbers them. And yeah, and their morale situation was already a bit low too. You see Sexyman committing to a cavalry charge against those Prussian fusiliers on the flank there. Nicely well executed. Yeah, that's GG. That's GG. 4-9 managed to bring home the victory despite those counter charges, those counterattacks that the Fate team did there. They almost got cocked up a good bit by those counterattacks, but they managed to survive, or at least Sexyman did. Kharhiv got pretty devastated when Teodor counterattacked, but Sexyman was able to endure this and bring it on home to the victory. So we're just gonna watch them finish off these remaining units here, pretty much. So let's go over the overview of this battle though. So like I said, Teodor and Crucible, being former members of Unity, you know, they still more or less play the same way pretty much. They use their usual tactic of having a strong middle defensive fortress-like formation with strong light infantry concentrated in the center forest. For, you know, that's a very good strategy for winning Siberian Plateau. That was a very hard thing to come against, but more or less 4-9, Sexyman and Kharhiv, they put up a initial small resistance to that strong middle position there in the forest, and then they locked in the flanks, and then they used that supporting position from the flank to then concentrate firepower from the flanks and cavalry assaults into the middle to break up that center, and they were able to push Fate back out of the forest, more or less, and that was very, very, very good. That put them in a heavy advantage. However, once they then went to the flanks to finish and seal the deal, that's when Crucible and Teodor committed to their counterattacks, which devastated Kharhiv, and he more or less lost his army from there. But Sexyman was able to endure his counterattack because, you know, he was able to get the drop on Crucible from the start, because Crucible was going over to support Teodor. Sexyman endured the counterattack against him, and then he continued on his assault, and he was able to bring it home. Despite Kharhiv being destroyed, he was able to bring it home to the victory from there. And yeah, so good game between 4-9 and Fate here. You see the result screen here, and I will see you guys in the next battle. This has been 4-9 Emperor Dion, and later.